Hillary Clinton had not expected this. The woman who once called her a Russian asset, who demolished her presidential ambitions in a single debate moment back in 2019, now sat across from her with far more than words at her disposal. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard occupied the center chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee's investigative panel, surrounded by stacks of classified documents, FBI reports, and emails that Clinton had spent years insisting didn't exist. The marble hearing room fell silent as Gabbard opened the first folder. Cameras from every major network focused on Clinton's face, composed carefully neutral, but her eyes betrayed something the public rarely saw: calculation. She was measuring distances, weighing options, searching for exits that didn't exist. "Mrs. Clinton," Gabbard began, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had waited 5 years for this moment. "Thank you for appearing before this committee. We have a great deal to discuss about your use of intelligence agencies, your handling of classified material, and what appears to be a systematic pattern of placing personal ambition above national security." Behind Clinton, her attorney shifted uncomfortably. The committee chairman, Senator Tom Cotton, leaned forward with barely concealed anticipation. The ranking Democrat Senator, Mark Warner, looked like he wished he were anywhere else. This was not going to be a typical Washington hearing. This was going to be a reckoning. Gabbard turned to the first exhibit, sliding it across the polished wood table. Her fingers, steady from years of military discipline, didn't tremble as she began. October 17th, 2019. You appeared on a podcast and made the following statement about me, and I quote, "I'm not making any predictions, but I think they've got their eye on somebody who is currently in the Democratic primary and are grooming her to be the third-party candidate. She's the favorite of the Russians." Clinton's expression remained neutral, but her hands resting on the table tensed slightly. "When pressed," Gabbard continued, "you clarified that you were calling me a Russian asset, a sitting member of Congress, an officer in the Army National Guard who served in Iraq. You labeled me a traitor to my country on national television." "I never used your name," Clinton began. "You didn't have to." Gabbard's interruption was surgical. "Every major news outlet immediately identified me as the target of your accusation. The damage was instantaneous and intentional. But here's what interests this committee, Mrs. Clinton: the coordination behind that accusation." She pulled out a series of emails, each one tagged with exhibit numbers. "These are internal communications from your political team obtained through subpoena. October 12th, 5 days before your podcast appearance. Subject line, TG Strategy. Would you like me to read them aloud, or would you prefer to explain to this committee why your staff was developing a coordinated media strategy to label me as a Russian operative?" The room's temperature seemed to drop. Clinton's attorney leaned in to whisper something, but she waved him off. Those emails were discussing opposition research, which is standard political practice. Opposition research. Gabbard let the words hang in the air. "Mrs. Clinton, opposition research involves finding facts about an opponent's record. Their votes, their statements. What these emails describe is something else entirely. Let me read from Exhibit 3B. We need NBC, CNN, and WAPO coordinated on the Russia angle. State Department sources can provide background on Syria meetings. Intel community contacts should remain anonymous." She looked up from the document, her gaze level and unblinking. "You didn't just attack me, Mrs. Clinton. You orchestrated a coordinated campaign involving mainstream media outlets. And according to this email intelligence community sources, to paint a sitting congresswoman as a foreign agent. Not because you had evidence, because I threatened your political interests." Senator Cotton jumped in. "Director Gabbard, Can you tell the committee what intelligence assessment, if any, supported Mrs. Clinton's allegation? Yes, Senator. As Director of National Intelligence, I now have access to every intelligence report assessment and source collection regarding foreign influence operations. I've reviewed 5 years of material. She paused for effect. There has never been, not once, any intelligence indicating I had improper contact with Russian officials, received Russian funding, or coordinated with Russian interests. The entire allegation was fabricated. Clinton leaned forward, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she reserved for moments when she felt cornered. Director Gabbard, I think you're being overly sensitive about what was clearly political commentary during a heated campaign. Overly sensitive. For the first time, emotion crept into Gabbard's voice. You accused a combat veteran of treason. You used your platform as a former Secretary of State to suggest I was working for a hostile foreign power. And when I sued you for defamation, your spokesperson responded in Russian, mocking me. She pulled out another document. But what really interests me is this. Why did the New York Times, just 2 days before your podcast appearance, publish an article suggesting I was the Kremlin's preferred Democrat? A coincidence. The document landed on the table with a soft thud. This is an email from one of your former State Department staffers to a New York Times reporter, dated October 15, 2019. It references background material on Gabbard's suspicious Syria connections and suggests the reporter might want to talk to sources at State about her isolationist positions aligning with Russian interests. Clinton's composure finally cracked just slightly. A muscle in her jaw twitched. So, let me be clear about what happened, Gabbard said, her voice returning to that measured prosecutorial tone. Your team coordinated with media outlets to plant stories about me. Then you appeared on a podcast to amplify those stories. Then your surrogates in the intelligence community, people you'd worked with for years, whispered to journalists about concerns regarding my foreign policy positions. All of this created a narrative that I was somehow compromised by Russia. She leaned back in her chair, letting the silence build. The irony, Mrs. Clinton, is that while you were calling me a Russian asset, you were the one who had actually funded intelligence work using Russian sources. But we'll get to that later. Senator Cotton cleared his throat. Mrs. Clinton, do you have any evidence, any at all, to support your October 2019 allegation that Representative Gabbard was being groomed by Russians? The silence stretched. Clinton's attorney whispered urgently. She shook her head. I was expressing concerns about, yes or no, Mrs. Clinton, do you have evidence? No. The word hung in the air like an admission of guilt. Gabbard made a note on her legal pad, her expression unreadable. Round 1 was complete. Let's move to your time as Secretary of State, Gabbard said, shuffling papers with deliberate slowness. Specifically, let's discuss your private email server. Clinton's expression hardened. This was familiar territory, ground she'd defended hundreds of times before Congress, the FBI, in debates. She knew the talking points by heart. As I've said many times, using a private email account was a mistake, but it was allowed. Mrs. Clinton. Gabbard's interruption was gentle but firm. I'm not asking about your private email account. I'm asking about your private server, in your basement, containing classified information. And more importantly, I'm asking about what happened when you were ordered to turn that information over to Congress. She slid a timeline across the table large enough for the cameras to capture. March 4, 2015. The House Select Committee on Benghazi issues a subpoena for all emails related to Libya. Your attorneys acknowledge receipt of this subpoena. Clinton nodded. Yes, and we complied. We turned over all work-related emails to the State Department months before that subpoena. Did you? Gabbard's eyebrow arched slightly. Because according to the FBI's investigation, something very interesting happened between March 25th and March 31st, 2015, 3 weeks after that subpoena was issued. She pulled out another document, this one marked with FBI letterhead. An employee at Platte River Networks, the company managing your server, had what he described to investigators as an "oh shit" moment. He realized he hadn't deleted your email archive as instructed in December 2014. So 3 weeks after Congress subpoenaed those emails, he used a software program called BleachBit to permanently erase 33,000 emails. Those were personal emails, Clinton interjected, her voice rising slightly. They were about yoga routines, my daughter's wedding. BleachBit, Gabbard continued as if Clinton hadn't spoken, is not a program you use casually. It doesn't just delete files. It overwrites them multiple times to prevent forensic recovery. As one FBI investigator told Congress, you don't use BleachBit for yoga emails. You use it when you really don't want anyone to see what you're hiding. Senator Cotton leaned in. Director Gabbard, for those watching who may not understand the technology, could you explain what using BleachBit means? Certainly, Senator. When you normally delete a file on a computer, you're essentially removing the signpost that tells the computer where that file is located. The data remains on the hard drive until it's eventually overwritten by new data. Forensic investigators can often recover deleted files. BleachBit is different. It actively overwrites the data multiple times, making recovery essentially impossible. It's the digital equivalent of shredding a document, burning the shreds and scattering the ashes. She turned back to Clinton. The question is, why did your team feel the need to take such extraordinary measures to ensure these emails could never be recovered, even by federal investigators with a subpoena? Clinton's attorney was scribbling notes frantically. She glanced at them, then back at Gabbard. I was not personally involved in the deletion of those emails. I didn't direct anyone to, Mrs. Clinton, with respect. That answer is carefully parsed. Gabbard pulled out testimony transcripts. Here's what the FBI investigation found. In December 2014, your Chief of Staff, Cheryl Mills, instructed Platte River Networks to change the email retention policy and delete emails older than 60 days. But the employee forgot. Then, in March 2015, after the Benghazi Committee issued its subpoena, that same employee remembered and carried out the deletion using BleachBit. She paused, looking directly at Clinton. Your attorney is correct that you didn't personally direct this deletion in March 2015. But here's my question. In December 2014, when the State Department requested that all former secretaries preserve their work-related emails, why did your Chief of Staff instruct your IT team to delete emails? And why didn't you stop the deletion when you learned about the subpoena in March? I never saw that subpoena. You never saw a congressional subpoena directed at you personally. Gabbard's disbelief was evident. Mrs. Clinton, you're an attorney. You served in the Senate. You were Secretary of State. Are you seriously telling this committee that when Congress issued a subpoena for your records, nobody thought to inform you? The silence that followed was damning. Senator Warner, the Democrat, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. Mrs. Clinton, I think what troubles the committee is the pattern. It's not just the deletion. It's the private server in the first place. It's the 33,000 emails deemed personal and destroyed. It's the fact that the FBI recovered over 17,000 work-related emails from that supposedly personal batch. It's the use of BleachBit. It's the destroyed mobile devices. 13 devices, Gabbard interjected quietly. Some destroyed with hammers. Clinton's face flushed. That is a gross mischaracterization. Those devices were old and needed to be disposed of properly. By physical destruction, Gabbard pulled out photos evidence from the FBI investigation showing shattered BlackBerry devices. Mrs. Clinton, when I completed my service in Iraq and returned my military equipment, we had procedures for disposing of devices that had handled classified material. We wiped them using approved methods and turned them over to security personnel. We didn't take hammers to them. She leaned forward, her voice taking on an edge. But you know what really troubles me? The content of the emails we did recover. The FBI found 110 emails containing classified information that was classified at the time it was sent or received. 22 of those were top secret, the highest classification level. 8 email chains contained information classified as special access program information material, so sensitive that even most people with top secret clearance can't access it. Clinton started to respond, but Gabbard wasn't finished. You told the FBI you didn't know how to identify classified information because it wasn't marked with classification headers. But Mrs. Clinton, you received classification training when you became Secretary of State. You signed documents acknowledging you understood the rules. And as the head of an agency that generates classified material, you absolutely knew that not everything that's classified is marked as such. She pulled out a damning piece of evidence, Clinton's own signed non-disclosure agreement from 2009. This is your signature correct. On a document stating, I hereby acknowledge that I have received a security indoctrination concerning the nature and protection of classified information. I have been advised that the unauthorized disclosure, unauthorized retention, or negligent handling of classified information by me could cause damage or irreparable injury to the United States or could be used to advantage by a foreign nation. The room was so quiet that the clicking of camera shutters sounded like gunfire. Director Gabbard, Senator Cotton said, what consequences have other government employees faced for similar violations? Gabbard had been waiting for this question. She pulled out a list. In 2015, Naval Reservist Brian Nishimura was sentenced to 2 years of probation and a $7,500 fine for downloading classified materials to his personal device without authorization. In 2016, Marine Major Jason Bresler was forced out of the Marines for sending a single classified email over an unclassified system to warn colleagues about a security threat, an email that may have saved lives. In 2018, Air Force Staff Sergeant Mark Sims was court-martialed for mishandling classified information. In each case, the individuals faced severe consequences, loss of clearance, end of career criminal charges. She looked at Clinton directly. You maintained a private server containing special access program information, the most highly classified material our government possesses, in your basement. When ordered to preserve those emails, they were destroyed using software designed to prevent recovery. And yet the FBI declined to recommend prosecution because they couldn't prove intent. Tell me, Mrs. Clinton, do you think those service members I just mentioned had intent? Or did they make mistakes, just like you claim you did? Clinton's jaw clenched. I was cleared by the FBI. Director Comey said you were extremely careless with highly classified information. That's a quote. He also said that if anyone else at the State Department had done what you did, they would face severe consequences. Another quote. Gabbard closed the folder in front of her. The FBI chose not to prosecute you, Mrs. Clinton. They had that discretion. But let's be clear about what the evidence shows. You set up a private server to avoid oversight. You conducted official State Department business on that server, including communications containing the nation's most closely guarded secrets. When Congress came asking questions, 1,000 emails were destroyed. When the FBI investigated, you claimed ignorance of basic classification procedures that every junior State Department officer understands. And when your story kept changing, you were never held accountable. She paused, letting her words sink in. The question before this committee isn't whether the FBI had enough evidence to prosecute. The question is whether someone with your pattern of putting personal convenience over national security should ever have been trusted with our nation's secrets in the first place. Clinton had no answer. Round 2 went to Gabbard. The afternoon session began with Gabbard pulling out photographs. Not documents, this time photographs. They showed a burning diplomatic compound, smoke rising into a dark sky. September 11th, 2012, she said quietly. Benghazi, Libya. 4 Americans died that night. Ambassador Chris Stevens, Information Officer Sean Smith, and former Navy SEALs Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty. I want to talk about what you knew when you knew it, and what you told the American people. Clinton's expression shifted to one she'd worn many times before, solemn, pained, rehearsed. Those deaths were a tragedy, and I've said many times, you've said many things, Mrs. Clinton. Let's talk about what you knew. Gabbard pulled out a timeline. At 4:05 p.m. Washington time on September 11, 2012, you received an email from your staff. Subject: Update on Benghazi attack. The email states, Ansar al-Sharia has claimed responsibility. She looked up. Ansar al-Sharia is a terrorist organization. So at 4:05 p.m., you knew this was a terrorist attack. Not a protest, not a spontaneous demonstration. A planned terrorist attack. The situation was fluid, Clinton began. Initial reports are often at 10:08 p.m. that same night. Gabbard continued, you sent an email to your daughter Chelsea. You wrote, and I quote, 2 of our officers were killed in Benghazi by an al-Qaeda-like group. So you told your family the truth. It was terrorism. She pulled out another document. The next day, September 12th, you spoke with the Egyptian Prime Minister. According to the transcript, you told him, we know that the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film. It was a planned attack, not a protest. Gabbard set down the documents and looked directly at Clinton. So you knew it was terrorism. You told your daughter it was terrorism. You told foreign leaders it was terrorism. But what did you tell the American people? She didn't wait for an answer. On September 14th at Dover Air Force Base, as the flag-draped coffins of those 4 Americans were being carried off a plane, you told their families that the attack was caused by an inflammatory video. Tyrone Woods' father took notes. He wrote down your words, we will make sure that the person who made that film is arrested and prosecuted. The room was deadly silent. Even the reporters had stopped typing. You looked those families in the eye, Mrs. Clinton, and you lied to them. While their sons and husbands were being brought home in coffins, you lied to them about how they died. And you did it because you had an election to win. Clinton's face reddened. That is absolutely, is it? Gabbard's voice cut through the objection. Because on September 14th, your State Department authorized $70,000 in taxpayer money for advertisements in Pakistan denouncing the anti-Muslim video. You promoted the video narrative even though you knew it was false. You sent your spokesperson, Susan Rice, to 5 Sunday shows to repeat the video story. And when Congress started investigating, you stood before them and said, and America will never forget this. What difference at this point does it make? She let the words hang in the air, knowing that millions of Americans remembered that moment that cavalier dismissal of 4 dead Americans. It makes a difference, Mrs. Clinton, because those families deserved the truth. It makes a difference because the American people deserve to know that our diplomatic compound in Libya was underprotected, despite more than 600 requests for additional security. It makes a difference because you pushed for the intervention in Libya that created the chaos that got those men killed. Gabbard pulled out another document, an email from 2011. This is from March 2011. You're discussing the proposed intervention in Libya. You're excited about it. You see it as a legacy-building opportunity. And then in October 2011, when Muammar Gaddafi was killed, you went on television and laughed? We came. We saw he died, you said, chuckling like it was a joke. She played the video clip. Clinton's voice echoed through the chamber. We came. We saw he died, followed by her infamous cackle. That's not the sound of a diplomat concerned about regional stability. That's the sound of someone celebrating a political victory. But what happened after Gaddafi died? Mrs. Clinton. She didn't wait for an answer. Libya descended into chaos. It became a haven for ISIS and Al-Qaeda. It became a hub for human trafficking. The weapons we'd helped distribute to anti-Gaddafi rebels ended up in the hands of terrorists across Africa and the Middle East. And our own embassy in Benghazi became a target because we'd destabilized an entire country and then left a skeleton security force to guard our people. Senator Cotton jumped in. Director Gabbard, did the State Department respond to those 600 security requests? No, Senator. Multiple diplomatic security agents testified that their requests were denied or ignored. One agent said the State Department was playing terrorist roulette. And when the attack happened, when our people were under fire for 13 hours, no help came. She turned back to Clinton. As a veteran who served in Iraq, I've been in situations where we called for support, and our military moved heaven and earth to reach us. Those SEALs who died in Benghazi, Tyrone Woods, and Glenn Doherty, they didn't have to be there. They were at a CIA annex a mile away. But when they heard the attack, they didn't wait for orders. They grabbed their weapons and rushed to help. They fought for 7 hours, and they died on that rooftop because no help came. Her voice thickened with emotion. So when you say, what difference does it make? Mrs. Clinton, it makes all the difference in the world. Those men died because of policy decisions you championed and security requests you ignored. And then you lied about why they died because the truth was politically inconvenient. Clinton's attorney was whispering urgently, but she pushed him away. I deeply regret what happened in Benghazi, she said, her voice strained, but I did not lie. You stood next to flag-draped coffins and blamed a YouTube video you knew had nothing to do with the attack. What would you call that? No answer came. The silence said everything. Gabbard allowed a brief break before the afternoon session resumed. When Clinton returned to her seat, she looked older, more tired. The morning had taken its toll. Mrs. Clinton, let's discuss the Clinton Foundation, Gabbard began. Specifically, let's discuss the foreign governments and entities that donated to your family's foundation while you served as Secretary of State. Clinton straightened in her chair. The Clinton Foundation has saved millions of lives through its work on HIV/AIDS climate change. I'm not questioning the Foundation's charitable work, Gabbard interrupted. I'm questioning the appearance and the reality of foreign governments buying access to America's chief diplomat. She pulled out a chart showing donations from various countries. Between 2009 and 2013, while you served as Secretary of State, the Clinton Foundation received millions of dollars from foreign governments. Saudi Arabia, between $10 and $25 million. Qatar, between $1 and $5 million. Kuwait, between $1 and $5 million. The United Arab Emirates, between $1 and $5 million. She looked up. These are not countries known for their commitment to women's rights or LGBTQ equality causes your foundation claims to champion. So why did they give? They gave to support the foundation's humanitarian work, Clinton said, but her voice lacked conviction. Did they? Gabbard pulled out internal State Department emails. Because these emails tell a different story. This one is from your Deputy Chief of Staff, Huma Abedin, to another staffer. It's about a request for a meeting with you from a major foundation donor. The staffer asks if the meeting is necessary. Abedin responds, "He's a significant donor. We should try to accommodate." She pulled out another email. This one is from Doug Band, who ran the Clinton Global Initiative, to Abedin and Cheryl Mills. He's asking them to help secure a position for someone who has done a lot for the foundation. Your staff responds by arranging meetings and making introductions. Gabbard set down the emails. This is the definition of pay-to-play, Mrs. Clinton. Foreign governments and wealthy individuals gave money to your family's foundation, and in return, they got access to you and your staff at the State Department. Senator Cotton leaned in. Director Gabbard, can you give the committee specific examples of decisions Secretary Clinton made that may have benefited foundation donors? Yes, Senator. Let's start with Russia. She pulled out a thick file. In 2010, a company called Uranium One, which controlled about 20% of America's uranium production capacity, was being acquired by Rosatom, the Russian state nuclear agency. This required approval from multiple U.S. government agencies, including the State Department. She opened the file. The chairman of Uranium One, Ian Telfer, donated $2.35 million to the Clinton Foundation during and after the sale process. Other shareholders in Uranium One donated millions more. Former President Bill Clinton was paid $500,000 for a single speech in Moscow by a Russian investment bank with ties to the Kremlin, a speech given while the Uranium One deal was under review. Clinton started to object, but Gabbard kept going. The State Department approved the sale. 20% of America's uranium production capacity ended up under Russian control, and millions of dollars flowed to your foundation from people who benefited from that sale. I was not personally involved in that decision, Clinton said quickly. There were 9 agencies involved, but the State Department was one of them. And you appointed the person who sat on the committee that made the approval. You expect this committee to believe that millions of dollars in donations from deal principals to your family foundation had no influence whatsoever on that decision. She pulled out more documents. Or let's talk about Haiti. After the devastating 2010 earthquake, billions of dollars in aid flowed to Haiti. The State Department, under your leadership, played a major role in coordinating that aid. The Clinton Foundation also got involved. And somehow, reconstruction contracts seemed to flow to Clinton Foundation donors and friends. For example, your brother Tony Rodham sat on the board of a mining company that received one of the first gold mining permits issued in Haiti in over 50 years. Despite the fact that he had no mining experience, despite the fact that VCS Mining's permit raised serious environmental and corruption concerns, Clinton's face reddened. I had nothing to do with your brother getting a lucrative position in Haiti while you oversaw aid to Haiti, Mrs. Clinton. Haitians themselves protested. Haiti Grassroots Watch investigated and found that Clinton Foundation donors received preferential treatment for reconstruction contracts. The Haitian people called it disaster capitalism. What do you call it? She didn't wait for an answer, pulling out financial records. Here's what troubles me most. In 2014, as you were preparing to run for president, The Clinton Foundation received significant donations from foreign governments. That same year, your speaking fees hit record highs, $250,000 or more per speech from foreign entities and corporations with business before the State Department. She pulled out a chart showing the foundation's revenue over time. And then, after you lost the 2016 election, something interesting happened. Clinton Foundation donations dropped by more than 75%. The Clinton Global Initiative shut down. Countries that had donated millions suddenly stopped giving. She looked directly at Clinton. If these countries were giving because they believed in your charitable work, why did they stop donating when you lost political power? The answer is obvious. They weren't investing in charity. They were investing in influence. Senator Warner spoke up clearly uncomfortable. Director Gabbard, I think we need to be careful about implying that foundation donations automatically equal corruption. I'm not implying, Senator. I'm stating facts. Foreign governments gave millions to the Clinton Foundation. Secretary Clinton made decisions that benefited those governments or the individuals connected to them. After she lost power, the donations dried up. That's not charity. That's pay to play. She turned back to Clinton. You've spent your career claiming to fight for transparency, for accountability, for putting American interests first. But the evidence shows you used your position as Secretary of State to enrich your family foundation, to benefit donors, and to build a political war chest for your presidential campaign. You turned American foreign policy into a commodity for sale to the highest bidder. Clinton's hands gripped the edge of the table. That is a disgusting mischaracterization. Then explain the pattern, Mrs. Clinton. Explain why foreign governments donated millions while you had power and stopped when you didn't. Explain the emails coordinating foundation business with State Department business. Explain why your staff treated foundation donors differently than regular citizens seeking State Department help. No explanation came, just silence and the clicking of cameras and the weight of evidence that couldn't be explained away. The hearing room had been tense all day, but as evening approached and Gabbard opened her final folder, the atmosphere became electric. Everyone in the room knew what was coming. Mrs. Clinton, I want to close by discussing your 2016 presidential campaign and specifically what you did when you realized you might lose. Clinton's eyes narrowed. I ran a campaign focused on issues that matter to Americans. You funded the creation of a false dossier, alleging that Donald Trump was compromised by Russia, and then you used your political connections to inject that dossier into American intelligence agencies and media outlets, triggering a 2-year investigation that tore this country apart. The words landed like a bomb. Clinton's attorney shot to his feet. Mr. Chairman, this is beyond the scope. Sit down, Counselor, Senator Cotton said quietly. It's very much within our scope. We're investigating the misuse of intelligence agencies for political purposes. Continued Director Gabbard. Gabbard pulled out financial records. In April 2016, your campaign and the Democratic National Committee hired a law firm, Perkins Coie. Perkins Coie hired Fusion GPS, an opposition research firm. Fusion GPS hired Christopher Steele, a former British intelligence officer, to dig up dirt on Donald Trump. The total cost, over $1 million paid through Perkins Coie to obscure the source. She pulled out the now infamous dossier. What Steele produced was this, a series of memos making salacious and unverified allegations about Donald Trump. The sources, Russian nationals with connections to the Kremlin. So let me be clear. Your campaign paid for a former foreign intelligence officer to collect information from Russian sources to influence an American election. Clinton started to object, but Gabbard raised a hand. "I'm not done, because what happened next is even more troubling." In September 2016, Steele began providing his memos to the FBI. He also provided them to the State Department, where your former colleagues still worked. And he provided them to media outlets, all while your campaign was funding his work. She pulled out FBI documents newly declassified. These are FBI records showing that Christopher Steele met with FBI officials and shared his dossier. The FBI used this dossier, paid for by your campaign as part of their justification, to seek a FISA warrant to surveil Carter Page, a Trump campaign associate. Senator Cotton interjected. "Director Gabbard, for the record, did the FBI disclose to the FISA court that this dossier was funded by the Clinton campaign?" "No, Senator. The FBI's application mentioned that the information came from someone hired by people seeking to discredit Trump, but they didn't disclose that people meant the opposing presidential campaign. They presented it as credible intelligence when it was paid political opposition research." She turned back to Clinton. "So, your campaign funded the dossier. The FBI used it to obtain surveillance warrants. Media outlets tipped off by sources connected to your campaign and to Steele began reporting on both the dossier's allegations and the FBI's investigation. And suddenly, in the final months of the 2016 campaign, the narrative became, Trump is compromised by Russia." Clinton's face was flushed. "I had no knowledge of the specific work. Mrs. Clinton, your campaign paid for it. Your campaign manager, Robbie Mook, your campaign chairman, John Podesta, they knew. Are you seriously claiming that a seven-figure expenditure on opposition research about your opponent's alleged Russia connections happened without your knowledge?" Silence. "Let me tell you what Special Counsel John Durham found in his investigation." She pulled out the Durham report. Durham concluded that the FBI had no verified intelligence to justify opening an investigation into the Trump campaign. He found that the Clinton campaign, through a lawyer named Michael Sussman, fed information to the FBI about an alleged secret communication channel between Trump Tower and Russia's Alpha Bank information that was quickly debunked but kept the investigation alive. She looked up. Durham also found that by July 2016, U.S. intelligence agencies had intelligence suggesting that your campaign was planning to vilify Donald Trump by stirring up a scandal claiming interference by Russian security services. The CIA briefed President Obama on this intelligence. Yet somehow the investigation into Trump continued, while no one investigated whether you were manufacturing the entire Russia narrative. She set down the Durham report and picked up another document. This is your tweet from October 31, 2016, 1 week before the election. "Computer scientists have apparently uncovered a covert server linking the Trump organization to a Russian-based bank." That wasn't true. You knew it wasn't true. Your campaign had hired the people who created that narrative. And you tweeted it anyway, with 1 week left in the election. Clinton's jaw clenched. Opposition research is standard practice in politics. Opposition research is finding out your opponent's voting record, their past statements, their real business dealings. It's not paying a foreign operative to collect unverified gossip from Russian sources, then using your political connections to launder that gossip through the FBI and the media. It's not using the machinery of American intelligence to spy on your political opponents. Gabbard leaned forward, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. Let me make sure everyone understands the full scope of what you did. You paid for Russian-sourced information about your opponent. You had that information provided to the FBI, who used it to obtain surveillance warrants. You had it provided to media outlets who reported on both the allegations and the investigation. Then, when Trump won anyway, you spent the next 2 years insisting that he was illegitimate because of Russian interference, the very interference narrative that you had helped create. She pulled out one final piece of evidence, a chart showing the timeline. Here's what happened April 2016. Your campaign hires Fusion GPS. June 2016, Steele begins producing memos. July 2016, Steele provides memos to FBI. September 2016, FBI uses dossier to support FISA application. October 2016, your campaign pushes Alpha Bank story. January 2017, BuzzFeed publishes the full dossier. May 2017, Special Counsel Mueller appointed. 2 years and $32 million later, Mueller finds no collusion. She looked at Clinton with something approaching contempt. For 5 years, this country was torn apart over allegations that you helped create and promote. Families were divided. Careers were destroyed. Trust in our institutions was shattered. And it all started with opposition research you paid for using Russian sources that you then weaponized through our intelligence agencies and media. She paused. You called me a Russian asset, Mrs. Clinton. But everything I've just described, paying for Russian intelligence, using the FBI against political opponents, creating a false narrative about foreign interference. That's exactly what you did. So I have one final question. The room was silent, everyone waiting. You spent years investigating Trump for allegedly colluding with Russia. But you're the one who actually paid for Russian-sourced information and used it to interfere in an American election. You're the one who weaponized intelligence agencies against your political opponents. You're the one who spread false information about foreign interference. So tell me, Mrs. Clinton, if I'm a Russian asset, what does that make you? Clinton sat frozen, her face pale. Her attorney was frantically scribbling notes. The Democratic senators looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Clinton spoke. I have nothing further to say. I've answered your questions. This hearing has become a partisan. Gabbard's laugh was bitter. Mrs. Clinton, everything I've presented today is documented in FBI reports, congressional investigations, special counsel findings, and your own emails. These aren't partisan allegations. These are facts. Senator Cotton cleared his throat. Mrs. Clinton, this committee will be referring this matter to the Department of Justice for review. We will also be issuing a report detailing what we've learned today. You're dismissed. Clinton stood her movements stiff. She gathered her papers with shaking hands. As she walked toward the door, not a single reporter called out a question. They were too stunned. Tulsi Gabbard remained seated, organizing her files with the methodical precision of a soldier completing a mission. She had waited 5 years for this moment. 5 years since Clinton had called her a Russian asset. 5 years of being smeared, sidelined, dismissed. And in one day, she had systematically dismantled the reputation of one of the most powerful women in American politics. The video of the hearing exploded across social media within hours. By the next morning, it had been viewed 50 million times. #Clinton accountability trended at #1 nationwide. Even mainstream media outlets that had spent years defending Clinton couldn't ignore the evidence Gabbard had presented. Within 48 hours, the Department of Justice announced it was opening a formal investigation into whether Clinton had obstructed justice in the deletion of her emails, whether she had violated laws regarding classified information, and whether she had made false statements to federal investigators. By the end of the first week, 3 former Clinton staffers who had been granted immunity in the original FBI investigation came forward with new testimony apparently no longer willing to protect a woman who looked increasingly likely to face criminal charges. Democratic donors and party leaders who had stood by Clinton through scandals before began distancing themselves. Several prominent senators who had defended her called for a full and fair investigation. Translation, they were jumping ship. The Clinton Foundation announced it would be restructuring its operations and returning certain donations. Within a month, it shut down most of its programs. Audit requests from multiple state attorneys general piled up. Bill Clinton canceled all his upcoming public appearances. Hillary Clinton's speaking engagements, already sparse after her 2016 loss, disappeared entirely. The Clintons retreated to their home in Chappaqua, surrounded by lawyers. A month after the hearing, a federal grand jury was empaneled in Washington, D.C. Witnesses began testifying. The investigation was real comprehensive, and unlike the FBI's 2016 review, it appeared to be treating Clinton like any other subject of investigation rather than a political figure too powerful to prosecute. Polling showed that 68% of Americans believed Clinton should be fully investigated. More surprisingly, 41% of Democrats agreed a sign that even her own party was tired of defending the indefensible. But perhaps most significant was what the hearing revealed about the broader corruption in Washington. Gabbard hadn't just exposed Clinton. She'd exposed a system where powerful politicians used intelligence agencies as political weapons, where foreign governments could buy access through charitable donations, where classified information rules applied to everyone except the elite, where lies could be maintained for years through compliant media. The hearing became a watershed moment. Not because Clinton would necessarily face prosecution, Washington had a long history of protecting its own, but because, for the first time in decades, someone had stood up and methodically, systematically, undeniably proven that the emperor had no clothes. 3 months later, the investigation continues. Multiple Clinton associates have testified before the grand jury. The Justice Department has indicated that charging decisions will be made based on the evidence without regard to political considerations. Whether Clinton will ultimately face criminal charges remains to be seen. Washington's track record suggests that even overwhelming evidence of wrongdoing by powerful political figures rarely results in prosecution. But one thing has already changed. Hillary Clinton's political career is over. Not ended by voters, but by facts. Not destroyed by partisan attacks, but by her own documented actions. And Tulsi Gabbard, the woman Clinton tried to destroy by calling her a Russian asset, had been the one to bring those facts to light. When the hearing ended, as Clinton shuffled out of the room in silence, Tulsi Gabbard sat alone at the witness table, methodically placing each document back into its folder. A reporter later asked if she felt vindicated. "This was never about vindication," she said. "This was about accountability. For too long, we've had a two-tiered system of justice, one for the powerful and one for everyone else. We've had politicians who lie to the American people, who mishandle our nation's secrets, who use their offices for personal enrichment, and who never face consequences." She closed the last folder and looked directly into the camera. What happened today wasn't personal. It was necessary. Because no one, no matter how powerful, no matter how connected, no matter how many times they've gotten away with it before, is above the law. As she walked out of that hearing room past the empty chair where Hillary Clinton had sat for 7 hours, past the reporters still too shocked to ask questions, past the senators who had watched one of their own systematically dismantled by facts and evidence, Tulsi Gabbard represented something America desperately needed: proof that the truth, no matter how long it takes, will eventually be heard. and that those who abuse power, no matter how untouchable they seem, can be held to account. The marble halls of the Senate fell silent behind her. But across America, in living rooms and diners, and on social media, the conversation was just beginning. This is just the beginning. The investigation continues. The evidence keeps mounting. And the American people are finally demanding accountability from those who thought they were too powerful to ever face consequences. What do you think? Should Hillary Clinton face prosecution for what was revealed in this hearing? Should there be consequences for weaponizing intelligence agencies against political opponents? For mishandling classified information? For pay-to-play schemes with foreign governments? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you think this story needs to be heard by more people, if you believe in accountability for the powerful, share this video. Because the only way we restore faith in our institutions is by proving that no one is above the law. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that expose what the establishment doesn't want you to know. Because the truth matters. Facts matter. And justice, no matter how long delayed, must ultimately prevail. The marble halls remember everything. And eventually, everything comes to light.